Hey, gang, it's Dr. Brian from Genesis Family Chiropractic here with another episode of Doc About Town. And today we get a chance to sit down with Mr. Kurt Meyer, who is a local celebrity and realtor. Real estate. You focus mostly on some of the historic homes in downtown Noblesville, right?
I do a lot of old homes.
Do a
That's
lot of
true.
old
Yeah.
homes. That's great. So, thank you, Kurt, for taking time to sit down and talk with us today. We're looking forward to this. And I told you I was going to spring something on you a little bit.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, here we go. You probably don't know this, but I've actually been following you since the Hoosier Contrarian days.
Oh, yeah.
That's been a hot minute ago.
That's a long time ago. You know, I back in my school teaching days, and I was selling real estate part time. So this is the late '90s. I wanted to do I wanted to write a newspaper column, and so I wrote like 8 sample newspaper columns, some on local issues, some on national issues, and I sent them to the old Noblesville Ledger and said, "Hey, I'd love to be a columnist." I didn't hear from them for about a month, and I thought, okay, well, they've decided I'm not good enough. And then they called me up and said, "Hey, yeah, we'd love to do that." So I did a newspaper column for 2 years, and then I think that I stepped away from doing that. And then in the early 2000s, the Noblesville Times got started up as a daily paper again. Yep. It had been like a weekly paper before that. And so I started doing a column in there, and that's when I took on that term, the Hoosier Contrarian, because my point of view, a little different from a lot of local people. And so it let me be the guy that said, I'll play the devil's advocate every week in my newspaper.
Well, I will tell you, even as a young man, it caught my attention. And so ever since then. So, then of course Facebook rolled around and we got connected through Facebook and we run into.
So it was you and my mother both reading letters.
two readers. Yeah. That's a heck of a readership. So tell us a little bit about Noblesville. And you said you were a teacher, and I didn't realize you'd been a school teacher. What did you teach?
Yeah, I taught graphic arts and photography, and I ran the school newspaper. And that was at Shenandoah High School, just on the other side of Pendleton.
Okay.
And I was in maybe my first year of teaching when I moved here, was just looking for someplace. I'd been in the Anderson-Muncie area through college. I went to Ball State. And that just felt like I didn't feel right there. The industry over there was decaying a little bit, a lot of job layoffs and so forth. I was looking for a more vibrant community that felt more like home, because I was born and raised in Tipton. And so I was used to living a couple of blocks from the courthouse square, that had been my life. And so was able to do the same thing here. And the preservation group was just starting around that time, people just starting to care about. So this is like 1987. Okay. Just now starting to care about historic homes. There was a handful of people, and that interested me too. And that's how I got kind of deeply involved in Noblesville. And by the early '90s, I was on city committees and the board of directors of the preservation group, and I was the first president of the Main Street group way back when I had hair.
Oh, wow!
And a long time ago.
That's fantastic. I had no idea you had that kind of history. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I've only ever really known you as the Hoosier Contrarian and as a realtor here in Noblesville. Right. So that's been a lot of fun. But it's always fun to see your posts now, especially on Facebook, and how you're tracking things. And one of the things I love about what you do is you stay so engaged with the community. And the whole thing with the State Road 32 construction project, the updates there were amazing.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about why. I mean, you said Tipton. You grew up in Tipton, kind of in downtown. Why do you gravitate towards more of this kind of a setting in downtown areas?
I guess I've always been. I was raised a townie, so to speak. When I was growing up in Tipton, the farming community was really strong. Lots and lots of family farms back then. Of course, late 70s, early 80s with the farm crisis, a lot of those family farms went away and became more corporate farms. But that town environment kind of worked for me. And when I first came to Noblesville, Old Town Noblesville wasn't that great a place. Noblesville's old guard had kind of left town and gone out to the harbors and the Wellingtons. There were a lot of big old Victorians like ours and others around the neighborhood that had been cut up into rental properties. Downtown had empty storefronts, and most of the storefronts had not been restored at that time. So I felt a little bit like a pioneer at the time, like I'm doing something and hoping other people come along. And there were some really vibrant, hardworking people involved in the preservation group and in Main Street in those early years that I think helped make Noblesville what it is now. And I was lucky to kind of come along when those folks were already doing their thing, and I could join in and participate with them.
Sure.
And so I've been in Old Town for 35, 36 years now, and it's all just dramatically changed.
Yeah.
And it feels like home. I often say to people, I feel like Old Town Noblesville is less like a small town and more like an urban environment, maybe a little bit more like Fountain Square or Irvington in Indianapolis, just because of the crush of traffic that we have all around us and the increasing population. But I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I published my first book in like 2001, and I would be on radio programs talking about small town issues and what it's like to live in a small town. And people would call into the radio program and say, "Oh, I grew up in downtown St. Louis, and our neighborhood was like a small town." And there was another one, 6 blocks down the street was outside of my boundaries. I wasn't allowed to go unless I was with my parents. So, this can feel very, very close knit and friendly, and it does in this neighborhood. When my kids were little, there was a gang of kids. They all ran with here, learned to ride their bikes in the alley, and played ball in the yards. And it's funny, it was mostly boys in those years, I think. And now there's kind of a gang of girls that run the back alley here that are all between the ages of about 7 and 12.
Yeah.
And they're rollerblading and biking and playing games, and I love it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's cool how it's evolved and changed, but it just keeps getting better.
Now, you used a term in that response that it's a term that I think I don't know if you coined it necessarily, but you kind of popularized it, Old Town Noblesville.
Yeah, I started doing that early in my real estate career because at that time, I aimed at selling Old Town because it seemed like other realtors weren't. And I remember my marketing classes from college, they said, if you go in the computer business, you're not going to compete with IBM. You're going to find something IBM's not doing, and you'll do that well. And I thought, well, they're all trying to sell waterfront and golf course stuff, the other realtors, so I'll sell this thing that they don't seem to care about. And that's really how I started my business. And so I tried to look out for the interests of Old Town Noblesville. And I noticed at that time that if you had a house for sale in the Wellingtons, you could say this is in Wellington Northeast. Or if it's in the harbors, you could say it's in South Harbor or North Harbor. But here, how do I identify this? Because
Ward 9.
Right.
And unless you've been here 50 years, you don't know what that is.
But even then, in the 90s, in the mid 90s, the majority of Noblesville's population didn't live down here anymore.
Right.
But a really important moment that kind of pointed all this out to me. I was making some sort of a presentation before the Board of Zoning Appeals or the Plan Commission, and the late Sam Zeckel, who was a business person that used to have a shop on the square long ago, he was retired at that time, and I was using the term Old Town, and he says, "Why do you keep calling it Old Town? It's just Noblesville." And so I pointed out to him, a majority of people of our population does not live down here. So there has to be some way that you know what I'm talking about when I talk about here as opposed to, Whitcomb Ridge or somewhere else. He didn't like that answer, but, calling it Old Town just kind of took hold. And,
Sure.
and it's what we call it now. And I guess I did that, and I'm okay with that. But I have friends that are allowed to. It sounds negative to call things old. We need to come up with another name, but I never came up with one. So
I think it's extremely descriptive, and especially with the transition that we've been seeing in what we're talking about, Old Town Noblesville, with the revitalization of homes and cleaning up, and like what you've told us about what you've done with your home here, with cleaning up and restoring, and I think it's perfectly descriptive. I think it's fantastic. That's great, and it is. Noblesville is I think a very tightly knit community as a whole, but there are two Noblesvilles.
Right.
There's Noblesville, and then it's kind of funny because we're a suburb of Indianapolis, but we have our own suburbs almost. The Harbors, the Wellingtons, the Whitcomb Ridge, like you said. That's amazing. Tell us a little bit about your place here, because you're right in downtown Noblesville.
Right.
You were telling us a little bit on the pre.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting history here. This house would have been kind of the original part of my house was an original sort of post-Civil War house. It was what's called a Gothic revival. It was built around 1870, timber frames, like a barn would be built.
Oh, sure.
With big beams and wood joints instead of nails and so forth. And then the gas boom hit in the late 1880s, and at that time, the gas boom that was making Anderson, Muncie, Noblesville grow was the biggest gas field known to exist in the world at that time. And so industry was coming here rapidly. And actually, this, I think, was a flip project. What we see now of my house, there was a gentleman that lived in the house next door, and he bought this lot, and he took that, what was a 1.5-story house with a very steep pitched roof, it was a Gothic revival, and he shaved off that half story, built a full second story on it, built this kitchen addition on the back and so forth. And so, it became what we see today. But when I tore off the front of the house, took all the siding off, you could actually see the studs and the design of the original house.
Oh, wow.
And then the new joists added to it. I think sometimes in the 1930s during the Great Depression, the house was turned into a double, which makes sense. Money got tight, and people tried to figure out, how do I keep my house? So one of the rooms upstairs had been made a kitchen, and we didn't realize that till we pulled up carpet and found linoleum on the floor in the places where the gas and the water lines came through the floor.
How about that?
And so forth. But there are a set of double doors at the bottom of our stairway that are a different style than everything else in the house, and they're kind of 1930 there. So that's where they closed those doors. So one person lived upstairs, one person lived down.
Yeah.
So then when my ex-wife and I bought the house in '95, it was covered with gold aluminum siding and had black plastic shutters. The porch had been removed, and all of the fish scales and the palladium window and the gable in front, those were all either covered up or had been removed. But you could kind of see where they were. There were scars on the underlayment that you could see the shape of what had been there. So it's been, when I started on this, I was a school teacher. So every summer I would work from this corner of the house to that corner of the house, and I would redo that. And so there were times, like when we first moved here, only this little section back here was done, and the rest still had aluminum siding on it.
Oh, wow.
And then the next summer I moved around the side and did a little bit more. And then every winter in those school teaching days, we would do one room indoors.
Okay.
And so, step by step. And then I remarried approximately 10 years ago, and my wife and I, finished projects and reimagined things a little bit more for our modern take. So there had been a separate kitchen and dining room side by side, and we pulled out the wall between those and made that one large room.
Sure.
And have been slowly tweaking little things here and there. I laid hardwood floors this last winter in one room.
Yeah.
And so it keeps going. And the structure we're sitting under now, I built. And when I was in high school, I worked for a cabinet shop that built kitchen cabinets and bath vanities and things like that. And then I worked for a competitor of theirs during college. Plus, I grew up in a home that you just didn't hire people to do things; you did it yourself.
Sure.
And my dad was a mechanical engineer, so good at doing a lot of things. So it just made sense that I would do. I've always been interested in building things, and so like even the brick patio we're on, these bricks came from sidewalks in my hometown of Tipton. They were going to go in a dumpster, so I brought them here and made a patio.
How about that?
So.
Well, that's something you and I have in common. My dad was a mechanical engineer too.
Oh yeah.
So
where did he go to college?
He went to Louisiana Tech.
Okay, my dad's Purdue.
Okay,
so, all right.
My family, my dad's mother's side of the family hails from Southern Indiana. His dad's side of the family is from Mississippi and Louisiana, and my mom's from Oklahoma. So I'm just a mutt from all over.
You're all over the place. But, well, aren't we all?
But unlike you, my dad was a mechanical engineer, so we did stuff.
Right.
My first two cars that I bought when I was in high school, we rebuilt the engines on those things from the ground up.
And
I'm not a car guy like that. I love cars, but I don't love turning wrenches. But that's just what you do. If something needs to be fixed, you just fix it. So
well, and I think that's such an important thing when you're growing up. When somebody presents to you, here's what's possible, and it doesn't mean you have to live your life that way.
Right.
But doing all of this stuff just seemed logical because that's what I saw growing up.
Yeah. Well, you were telling us too about your having built this portico here, but the furniture that's out here, you said you built from salvaged wood from the Lacey building, right?
Right. From the old Kirk Hardware. The owners of the building had taken me through at some point and told me what they were getting rid of. And I'm looking at all this wood that was just shelving in the mezzanines for, nails and excess paint and things of that nature for stocking the shelves downstairs. And I said, this is all going to go in a dumpster? And they said, yeah, unless you want it. So I went up there, and it was a filthy, dirty job, but, nice wide planks of wood that were 100, 130 years old. And I hauled it all home, and I built a tree house for my grandkids, and I built the wood furniture that's here on the patio.
That's awesome.
Just copying furniture I saw elsewhere in a restaurant. Took a bunch of pictures, took some measurements, and copied it.
That's great to be able to salvage and repurpose things like that.
I love it.
Because then otherwise, like you said, it ends up in a landfill. What good does that do to anybody?
And that, I'm going to jump in from back here. That you've been known kind of as the salvage man around town. How did you get that nickname?
Well, I have published 2 novels that are set here in Noblesville. One was originally published on the title Stardust, and when it got republished, the publisher changed the name to Noblesville. And then that publisher published my second novel, which is called The Salvage Man, and it's about a guy who's lost his job at the old Firestone plant here in Noblesville, and he's kind of down on his luck, and the only way he's found to survive is he's salvaging things out of houses before they're demolished, and selling them at antique stores.
Okay.
And so the book was called The Salvage Man. And so I would hashtag some of my stories about projects I'm doing or things that I find, hashtag The Salvage Man. And, so yeah, that stuck a little bit.
Isn't that funny? I didn't realize that Stardust had been renamed Noblesville. We have a copy of Stardust at home.
Yeah. You know what? When I sat down with that second publisher, the book had reverted back into my ownership and from the original publisher. And the second publisher, at the very first marketing meeting, we were in Little Rock, Arkansas, said, "Oh, we can't call this Stardust anymore. Open up your laptop computer and we'll tell you why." He said, "Google Stardust the novel," which I hadn't done in years. And I did, and 3 pages of Google hits about Neil Gaiman's book called Stardust, which I think is a science fiction novel. And they said, "You see, we'll never be found
right
if we call it this again."
Yeah.
And so they re-edited the book, which was a really fun project to see the book anew, 15 years later from when it was originally published, and make it a better book, because I felt the original version wasn't edited as well as it could be. They were editing for length and not for quality, because they were in a hurry to try and get this book out, and this next group is more interested in how can we make this a better book. I'm like, I'm all for that. So
that's fantastic.
Fun experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Boy, what a life you've had. This is really cool. I love getting to meet people and talk to people like they've been around a while and have done some interesting things like that. And as you're going through it, you probably don't think it's interesting as you're doing it. You just do it.
Well, some of it I forget, and somebody's like, "Oh, I read your novel." Like, "Oh, yeah, I did that, didn't I?"
Yeah.
I forgot about that, right? You kind of forget that.
Yeah.
I mean, there were times that it consumed my life. I mean, when Stardust was first published, like 2000, 2001, in that period of time, within 6 months of publishing, the publisher went bankrupt.
Oh, gosh.
And we had seen financial trouble, and I had hired an attorney to help me figure out, they've already broken the contract. This is before the book ever came out. What can I do to protect myself? And they said, well, why don't you force them into a new contract that says that if they file bankruptcy, you get ownership of all the books. So one day I was doing yard work out here, maybe a month after I heard they were filing for bankruptcy, and a truck came down the alley and said, "Are you Kurt Meyer?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "We've got your books here." And I said, "What books?" He goes, "We have 4,500 books."
Oh my God.
So we unloaded them into the garage. And so then I spent the next year of my life trying to figure out, how do I market a book? Because I didn't even know how to do it. But so there was a year of my life that 2 nights out of the week I was going to bookstores, library board meetings, book club meetings, because there's a lot of history and preservation. I was going to preservation groups around the state, historical societies, and doing my little dog and pony show. And I sold all those books. So
that's amazing.
So then that gap, and that second publisher had seen a copy of it, and they called me and actually said, "Do you own the rights to this?" And I said, "I do now." And they said, "Well, would you be willing to republish it? Because we actually think it could be a better book than it is. We think there's some things that weren't done right." And I said, "I totally agree with you." And so, yeah, it was fun.
How about that?
In I think it was 2012 maybe to 13 to go back and do it all over again. Yeah.
Like I said, I had no idea that it was a newer version of the same novel.
I hated losing that title, though, because Hoagie Carmichael, who's from Indiana, his song Stardust, lyrically was just a really good metaphor, backdrop for the story and for what happens to the characters in that book. And so I hated losing that title, but oh well.
Yeah. But yeah, like you said, you would never have been found.
I'll tell you a funny story. The local attorney, Matt Cook, stopped me once after it was republished, said, "Kurt, you got me there. I bought your new novel, and I started reading it, and I realized I'd already read it. You changed the name." I tried to tell as many people as possible, but I guess I missed Matt. So.
That's funny. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think I picked up a copy of Stardust when you had it at Noble.
Mm-hmm.
I'd seen it there. I'm like, hey, that's I know that name. I know Kurt's name. Let's pick that up. So I think I bought 2 copies, one for me and one for my mom.
Very good.
So yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
Well, Kurt, thank you. This has been great.
Yeah,
I thoroughly enjoyed
treated
this.
like a celebrity for 20 minutes.
Well, you are a celebrity. You're a local
morning.
celebrity.
Yeah.
But I heard there was a country song now. It's I forget how it goes, but it basically says there are a lot of famous people in my hometown that you've probably never heard of.
Right,
it talks about all the people that this guy grew up with, and it's like, you're kind of one of those famous people.
Well, thank you. It's
more people have heard of.
It's fun to be treated that way.
Absolutely. Great. Yeah. Thanks again for meeting with us today.
You bet. So thank you so much.
You bet. Absolutely. And if you are in the market for a home in Old Town Noblesville or beyond, or have a home that you'd like to sell, talk to Kurt. He's kind of the local expert. I'm sure he'd be happy to help you and steer you in the right direction.
Great.
So, as always, we want to make sure and say a big thank you to the Noblesville Elks Lodge for helping to sponsor Doc About Town to make sure we're able to get this out to you each week and provide you with interesting content. Please give us a like, a follow, and a share. Spread this around as much as you can, because lots of people would love to know, I'm sure, about Kurt's stories, and maybe pick up a copy of Noblesville, the novel, and read about what we get to enjoy here. So have a great day.